The camera descended, and soon it was swallowed by the abyss that was Mel's hole. A group of explorers huddled around their monitor. At first, the footage was uneventful, just the smooth, dark walls of what seemed like an endless pit. But then something changed. A distortion, a shape, a sound. Their hands trembled as they rewound the tape. What they saw defied logic, and what they heard chilled them to the bone. The pit wasn't just deep. It was something else entirely, something alive. For years, the government had denied its existence, but now undeniable proof was in their hands, and the world wasn't ready for it. The legend of Mel's hole all began with a phone call on February 21, 1997. A man named Mel Waters dialed into Coast to Coast AM, a late-night radio show known for exploring the unexplained. Speaking to host Art Bell, Mel shared a story that would soon take on a life of its own. He claimed to have discovered an inexplicably deep hole on his rural property near Ellensburg, Washington, a hole that, as far as he could tell, had no bottom. Mel wasn't the first to speak of the pit. According to him, the hole had been there for generations. Local Native American tribes allegedly called it the Devil's Hole and regarded it with fear. The Native Americans avoided it completely, believing it to be cursed, a place where unnatural forces were at work. Legends suggested that objects thrown into it vanished without a trace, never to be seen again. Over time, the stories faded into whispers, but for those who lived nearby, the hole remained an unsettling presence. For decades, residents treated Mel's hole as a peculiar but practical feature. Farmers, ranchers, and even everyday homeowners in the area used it as a dumping ground for old appliances, broken furniture, and household waste. No matter how much garbage they tossed inside, the hole never seemed to fill. Some locals even claimed to have thrown refrigerators, car parts, and massive piles of debris down the pit, yet no one ever heard an impact. There were no echoes, no sounds of objects hitting the bottom, just an eerie silence. More disturbingly, some farmers allegedly disposed of dead livestock there, believing the pit was a convenient way to clear away carcasses. The hole simply swallowed whatever was placed inside. But the most unsettling stories came from pet owners. Dogs, usually fearless, refused to go anywhere near the hole. Some would bark and growl if led toward it. Others cowered in fear and pulled away as if something unseen terrified them. Even birds were never seen perching near the hole's rim. Whatever lay at the bottom, or perhaps what rose from within, seemed to repel animal life entirely. Mel wasn't content with stories and superstitions. A naturally curious man, he decided to test the hole's depth himself. Armed with fishing equipment, he set out to measure just how deep it really was. He attached a 1-pound weight to the end of a spool of fishing line and lowered it into the abyss. 100 feet passed, then 1,000, then 5,000. The line continued to descend with no sign of resistance. Mel began tying together multiple spools, letting the line fall farther and farther. When he finally checked his mechanical counter, he was stunned. Over 15 miles of line had gone into the hole, and still it had not reached the bottom. To verify his experiment, he attached a roll of Lifesavers candy to the line. He reasoned that if the hole contained water, the candy would dissolve. When he pulled the line back up, the Lifesavers remained intact. This proved that whatever was down there, it wasn't a body of water. If Mel's measurements were accurate, the hole was deeper than any known man-made excavation. It surpassed even the Kola superdeep borehole in Russia, which extends only 7.6 miles into the earth. This was an impossibility. According to geologists, the pressure and heat at such depths should have crushed the walls, collapsed the hole, or at the very least, left some geological evidence. But Mel insisted his measurements were real. If his numbers were correct, then his hole defied every known law of physics. Word of Mel's hole spread rapidly. The idea of a bottomless pit, possibly thousands of feet deeper than anything on record, captured the imaginations of truth-seekers and skeptics alike. Soon, paranormal investigators amateur explorers, and conspiracy theorists all wanted answers. Was this a natural geological formation, or was it something else entirely? The more attention the hole received, the more strange events seemed to follow. Mel Walters himself would soon become the target of something far more menacing than rumors, something that suggested forces beyond his control were determined to silence him. As the mystery deepened, it became clear that this was no ordinary hole. Government cover-up and mysterious disappearance. Mel Walters had unknowingly started something far bigger than himself. What had once been an odd curiosity on his property suddenly became the subject of intense government scrutiny. Men in hazard suits appeared near the hole. Mel quickly realized he was no longer in control of his own land. At first, it was subtle. He noticed signs that someone had been near the hole, unfamiliar tire tracks in the dirt and fresh boot prints from heavy, military-style footwear. But soon it escalated. One morning, as he approached his land, a group of government officials stopped him before he could get any closer. They weren't ordinary police or state agents. These men were dressed in yellow hazmat suits and stood guard around what was once his property. Their message was clear. Mel was no longer welcome. Mel was confused and outraged. He demanded answers. The officials, however, refused to give him any. Instead, they claimed there had been a plane crash near his land, which meant access was now restricted for safety reasons. But Mel knew better. He had lived there for years. There was no evidence of a crash, no wreckage, no reports in the local news, no emergency crews. When he pushed back, things took a darker turn. A group of men in military uniforms and a plain-clothed official approached him with a deal. If he agreed to leave the US immediately and never return, he would receive $250,000 a year for the rest of his life. But if he refused, they made it clear that they had the power to make his life very difficult. One official suggested they could easily discover an illegal drug lab on his property, enough to put him behind bars for decades. The message was simple: take the money and leave or face consequences. Mel was shaken. He had expected pushback, but this was something else entirely. The federal government was involved, and they were willing to do whatever it took to control access to the hole. Despite the threats, Mel still wasn't sure what to do. He called into Coast to Coast AM a second time and updated Art Bell and the millions of listeners who had tuned in to hear the latest developments. He spoke about the military presence, the threats, and the strange government interest in a hole that supposedly shouldn't exist. Then suddenly, Mel was gone. He had promised a third appearance on the show, but he never called back. Art Bell's team attempted to reach him, but he had disappeared completely. No one could find him. His phone went silent, his home was abandoned, and then even his land was gone. Shortly after Mel's disappearance, the land where the hole was located was seized by the government. No official reason was given, but all records of Mel's ownership seemed to vanish overnight. Locals who had previously visited the area found it completely off-limits. Armed guards prevented anyone from approaching. Even more unsettling was what appeared in satellite images of the region. Researchers who had been following the story noticed that certain sections of the land near Manastash Ridge had been blurred or censored. It was a chilling confirmation that someone, whether the military, intelligence agencies, or another shadowy group, didn't want people seeing what was there. With Mel gone and the land seized, speculation exploded. Had he taken the government's offer and fled to Australia as they had instructed him? Or had something far more sinister happened? Some theorized that Mel had been silenced permanently. If the government was willing to take over his land and erase his records, it wasn't a stretch to believe they could eliminate him entirely. Others suggested something even more disturbing, that Mel had been thrown into his own hole. If Mel's hole was as deep as he claimed, it would be the perfect way to make someone disappear forever. No body, no evidence, no loose ends. Had he simply been erased, just like the land records and satellite images? In 2002, 5 years after Mel first went public with his story, a group of amateur explorers set out to find Mel's hole for themselves. Another mystery, buried deep in the hills of eastern Washington, kept resurfacing. a bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal. KFOR's Denise Whitaker headed east in search of the hole. Their search led them deep into the forests of Kittitas County, Washington. They hoped to uncover what the government was hiding, but what they found was even more baffling. Despite old maps referencing the area, the hole was simply gone. Had it been covered up, filled in, destroyed? Or was it still there, carefully hidden under government surveillance? The mystery wasn't over, and it was about to take another shocking turn. Explorers returned to Mel's Hole, the camera experiment. Years after Mel Waters' disappearance, the legend of Mel's Hole refused to fade. The government's unexplained involvement, the sudden land seizure, and the eerie accounts from locals only fueled public curiosity. If the hole had truly been covered up, why had they gone to such extreme lengths to erase it? Determined to uncover the truth, a group of amateur explorers and paranormal investigators set out to find the infamous pit once again. Among them were documentary filmmakers, independent researchers, and a handful of thrill-seekers who had spent years following rumors of bottomless pits, government secrets, and strange geological anomalies. Equipped with modern technology, they believed they had an advantage over those who had come before them. If something truly lurked within Mel's Hole, they were going to capture it on film. But first, they had to find it. Locating Mel's Hole wasn't easy. Without an exact map reference, they relied on old interviews, satellite images, and accounts from locals who claimed to have seen or heard stories about the pit before the land was seized. They scoured areas near Manastash Ridge, where the hole was rumored to be. At first, it seemed hopeless. The terrain had changed over the years, and if the government had taken steps to cover the hole, it was possible they had filled it in or concealed it under artificial landscaping. But then, one of the explorers stumbled upon something strange, a patch of disturbed earth, different from the surrounding landscape. The ground felt hollow beneath their feet, almost unnatural. Excited, they began digging. After hours of work, they unearthed a stone-lined opening, just as Mel Waters had described decades earlier. This was it. The infamous hole was still there, hidden, but not destroyed. They wasted no time preparing their equipment. The team rigged a high-tech camera system, complete with infrared capabilities, thermal imaging, and a night vision lens. A reinforced cable was secured to the device to ensure it could be safely retrieved. The plan was simple: lower the camera into the hole, record the descent, and analyze the footage afterward. As the camera began its slow journey downward, the team gathered around a live video feed. They watched as the walls of the pit came into focus. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The stone walls were smooth and strangely uniform, as if carved by something other than nature. There were no signs of plant life, no moisture, no debris clinging to the edges. Then, the camera reached a depth of around 100 feet. Something felt wrong. The temperature readings on the monitor dropped dramatically, far lower than the team expected for an underground space. The infrared sensors struggled to maintain an accurate readout. Still, they pressed on. At 300 feet, the camera captured something unusual. A faint glow flickered in the darkness. It was barely visible at first. The explorers leaned in and watched as the light pulsated, not like a reflection or a natural glow, but something deliberate, almost alive. One of the investigators whispered, asking if it could be bioluminescent organisms. But that didn't explain why the light was appearing in precise, rhythmic patterns. The glow came and went, almost like a pulse. Then movement. A shadow of some sort seemed to pass across the screen. It blocked out the light entirely for a split second before vanishing. The team exchanged nervous glances. They had expected to see rock formations, maybe even a cavernous expansion deeper in. But this was something they couldn't explain. One of them muttered that it might have been a trick of the light, but the tension in the air was undeniable. They continued lowering the camera. At 500 feet, the camera jerked suddenly. Something had touched it. The screen shuddered, as if the cable had been pulled or snagged. The lead operator steadied his hands to ensure the line remained taut. The team went silent, staring at the screen as the camera regained stability. Then they saw it. It was a shape, indistinct, but there. Something large seemed to be moving just beyond the reach of the infrared lens. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a rockfall. It was something that seemed eerily alive. One of the explorers panicked. The others hesitated, torn between capturing undeniable proof and protecting themselves from whatever might be lurking below. Then, a sound came through the speakers, not an echo, not falling debris, not static. It was a cross between a gush of air and something that sounded like a guttural whisper. The lead operator hit the retract switch and yanked the camera back to the surface as fast as the winch would allow. The screen flickered. Distortion cut through the video feed as the camera rose higher and higher, racing away from whatever was in the pit. Then suddenly, the screen went black. The footage had raised more questions than answers. Whatever lurked within Mel's hole wasn't just an optical illusion or a technical glitch. The distorted images, the odd sounds, and the strange movement deep within the abyss pointed to something far beyond normal understanding. Theories began circulating almost immediately, and each one was more disturbing and bizarre than the last. One of the most controversial theories was that Mel's hole was not a natural phenomenon at all, but part of a classified government project. Some believed the US military had discovered the hole long before Mel Waters ever spoke publicly, and that it had been used for experimental purposes ever since. The biggest clue pointing to this theory was the government's response. If Mel's hole was just a strange geological anomaly, why did officials seize the land, erase property records, and make Mel disappear? Why were satellite images of the area censored? Why were military personnel seen in the region? Some believed the hole might be a failed underground experiment, something so dangerous that the government had to bury all knowledge of it. The theories ranged from a high-energy physics test gone wrong to a deep Earth weapons facility. But the wildest turn in this story was yet to come: the sheep and the burning ice. As if the original mystery of Mel's hole wasn't strange enough, things took an even more bizarre turn when reports surfaced about a second hole, this time in Nevada. According to Mel Waters, before his sudden disappearance, he had been contacted by Native American elders who told him of another pit similar to the one he had discovered in Washington. But this one was different. Unlike the original, which was lined with smooth stone, this hole had a strange metallic lining. It was almost as if it had been constructed rather than naturally formed. Mel, along with a few locals, decided to conduct experiments on this new hole to see if it behaved the same way as the original. What they found defied logic, science, and every law of nature. Mel and his team devised a series of tests to better understand the Nevada hole. At first, they threw in small objects, rocks, sticks, and even a few electronic devices. As expected, nothing made a sound when it was dropped. It simply disappeared into the abyss, just like Mel's original hole. But then came the test that changed everything. A local rancher suggested lowering a live sheep into the hole. At first, it seemed like an extreme experiment, but they wanted to see if the animal would survive the descent. They rigged a harness, attached it to a rope, and carefully lowered the sheep into the void. The moment the sheep crossed the threshold, it began screaming, not in a way animals normally cry out. This bleating was something deeper, something more disturbing. The sound was unnatural, almost inhuman. The men panicked and pulled the animal back up as fast as they could. When they retrieved it, they were horrified. The sheep was dead, but not in any way they had expected. Its body was completely intact. There were no visible wounds and no trauma. But when they examined it further, they realized something was wrong. The internal organs had been cooked. It was as if the sheep had been placed in a microwave oven and heated from the inside out. Then they cut it open. Inside the sheep's carcass, nestled within its cooked organs, was something that should not have been there, a fetus. But not a normal one. Its skin was smooth and grayish, its limbs short but defined, and most disturbingly, it had fully formed eyes. The group froze, unsure of what to do. Had they unknowingly selected a pregnant sheep, condemning both her and her unborn lamb to death? Then, according to Mel, something even stranger happened. The creature moved. Before they could react, the creature disintegrated. In a matter of moments, its body collapsed into a puddle. Terrified but determined, the group continued their experiment. They retrieved a strange substance from the hole, a crystal-like formation unlike anything they had ever seen. It was cold to the touch, like ice, even in the desert heat. Then, out of curiosity, one of the men set a piece on fire. It burned instantly, igniting with an intense blue flame. But instead of burning out, the flame never extinguished. The ice kept burning, endlessly, without reducing in size. According to Mel, the locals later took the substance to a scientist. He determined that it could be an energy source, but like everything else connected to the holes, the discovery led to more secrecy, more danger, and more questions that would never be answered. The events surrounding the Nevada hole sound too bizarre to be real. A metallic-lined pit that cooks animals from the inside out, a seal-like fetus, a crystal that burns forever. Skeptics immediately dismissed Mel's claims. They argued that his utterances were nothing more than an attempt to keep the legend alive. But believers pointed out the undeniable patterns. Both holes seemed deliberately hidden. Both had underground anomalies that didn't match any known geological structures, and both, for some reason, had attracted extreme government interest. If the holes were man-made, then who created them? And why was the government so determined to control them? If they were naturally occurring, then what force made them behave this way? And if they were something else entirely, some kind of ancient experiment buried beneath the earth, then the real question wasn't about the holes themselves. It was about what they were holding back. The vanishing of Mel Waters. For years, Mel Waters was presumed gone for good after his sudden disappearance following his second Coast to Coast AM interview. No one had been able to locate him. His land had been seized, his name scrubbed from property records, and any attempt to verify his story led to dead ends. The man who had introduced the world to Mel's hole had seemingly vanished without a trace. Then, in 2002, he resurfaced. Mel reappeared unexpectedly. He called into Coast to Coast AM once more. His voice was different, shaken, uncertain, as if he himself wasn't sure what had happened to him. What he described was terrifying. Mel claimed he had been abducted by government agents, taken somewhere unknown, and subjected to bizarre medical procedures. He had no memory of the months or even years that had passed since his disappearance. He couldn't recall how he had gotten where he was or what had been done to him. Then there were the physical changes. He described waking up in a strange location. His body had been altered. He spoke of strange scars, marks on his skin that he couldn't explain. It was as if someone had operated on him and then wiped his memory of the procedure. Perhaps most disturbing was the overwhelming feeling that he wasn't supposed to be talking. He hesitated as he spoke. His words were measured, and his tone was cautious. It was as if he knew that by revealing this information, he was putting himself in immediate danger. As Mel continued to share his story, listeners could sense his fear growing. He spoke about the government's involvement in both holes, the one in Washington and the newly discovered one in Nevada. He speculated that these were not just natural formations. According to him, they were something far more sinister and intentional. He believed the government was studying them. Then he mentioned something chilling. He hinted that there were more holes, that what he had discovered was only the beginning, and that these anomalies exist all over the world. Mel promised he would return with more proof. He said he had one last thing to share, something so shocking that it would change everything. But he never did. That was the last time anyone ever heard from Mel Waters. After his 2002 call, he disappeared completely. No further attempts to contact him were successful. No records of his whereabouts surfaced. It was as if he had been erased once again. The government, as expected, remained silent. Officials continued to deny that Mel's hole ever existed. His land remained off-limits, heavily monitored, and shrouded in secrecy. And to this day, no one knows what really happened to Mel Waters. The man who found the hole may have fallen into a deeper one himself. Even today, curious explorers venture into the wilderness around Manastash Ridge, hoping to find something missed by previous searches. Amateur paranormal investigators, documentary filmmakers, and thrill-seekers alike continue to probe the area, determined to unravel the mystery. Yet all return empty-handed. Mel Waters himself remains missing. No sightings, no further communication, no solid answers. The strange footage, unsettling audio recordings, and bizarre claims remain open-ended, leaving the world wondering. Was Mel's hole a genuine anomaly, or just an extraordinary tale spun from imagination? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Until someone uncovers concrete evidence, the legend of Mel's hole and the search will continue.